Hello and welcome to Tether's Human Environment podcast, where we talk about the intersection between people, the homes we live in, and the natural things that impact our health, our lifestyle, and our property. With me as co-host, Brandon van Blerk, who is the founder and CEO of Tether, a New Zealand tech startup that works with building homeowners and occupants to solve building performance problems, improve health, reduce cost, and help create a sustainable future. Welcome, Brandon.
Hello, Colin. What an amazing intro that was. Thank you for that.
It was a big intro for a company doing big things.
Very fitting, I feel, and topical.
Brandon, today we're discussing the fact that how we live impacts our environment and what we can do to improve it. And I know it's not something people think a lot about, but as human beings, we have habits, and some of them are maybe not great habits or bad habits. And so there's these bad habits that home occupiers, and that's both homeowners and tenants, practice that negatively impact their health or the health of the property, the way we ventilate and that sort of thing. Would you agree that the habits and the way we live do, in fact, negatively impact our health and our property? And I'm probably not talking about things like smoking, but...
Yeah, no, absolutely. 100% agree. So the interesting thing is people spend the majority of their lives indoors, and in homes is a large proportion of that. And if you're a stay-at-home mum, or if you work from home, then it's even larger than those that leave during the week to go to work. Now, the interesting thing about a home is most people don't think about it as a living, breathing entity, but essentially your home is no different to something like your car, for example, or a motorbike if you have one, or a bicycle, where it requires continuous maintenance and almost an operating manual to make sure you're getting the most efficient use out of it. Most people just think about moving into their homes and they live and breathe there without really doing much. You know, they might open a window if they're feeling too hot, or they might close that window and put something warm on, or put a heater on if they're feeling too cold. But it's normally quite reactive and responsive rather than being proactive and something that they actually put consideration into. Now, the relationship between a home and its occupants, or the family that live in it, is a very symbiotic relationship. And the metaphor I normally like to use is one of a car, which I alluded to briefly earlier. And the similarities between a car and a home are quite specific around operation. So if you think about a car, when you buy one, you need to make sure that that car is legal and it can ride on the road. It's got a warrant of fitness. And the reason why it has a warrant of fitness is you don't want to drive a car and then it breaks down, a kilometer after you've driven it off the lot. You also want a car that's fit for purpose. So if you've got a large family, you don't want a two-seater sports car. And if you're a bachelor, then maybe you don't want a family vehicle. You want something a little bit more sporty. There's a bunch of decisions that you make into buying a car, and a lot of those things go into how I feel about it when I'm in that car, but also the operation of it. Now, a home is quite similar, but you don't have to take a home for a warrant of fitness once a year. And when you buy it, the best thing you'll probably do, or when you move into it, if you're lucky enough to rent something, especially in Auckland, you'll end up doing a pre-purchase inspection, or you'll have your property manager do an inspection to make sure that it's fit for purpose. But really what they're looking at is the surface level stuff. And they don't hand over the operation manual to you to say, this is how you should operate this home to get the maximum benefit out of it. And it's that thing that I think we're lacking in terms of the relationship between an occupant and the homes that we live in, is that operating manual is what's the best I can do to run the home as efficiently and as effectively as possible. To continue the metaphor of the car, if you're in a race against another car and it's faster, let's say you've got a Formula One vehicle versus a VW Bug, there's absolutely no way, no matter how good the driver is, that the VW Bug driver is going to beat the Formula One car. So that's an example of how operating something to the best of your ability will always hit against a glass ceiling if the thing that you're trying to do is not capable of doing the thing you want it to. So there is a level to which you can drive a home to its efficiency. So if a home is not built to be high performance, no matter how well you try to drive it, it'll only be able to get so much performance out of it until you actually have to improve the home to get better in full performance. On the other hand as well, if you've got a Formula One car, but you're not operating it correctly, you won't go anywhere either. You'll just keep stalling the car. Eventually the wheels might fall off. And in the same way, you can have a really high performance home, but unless you understand how to operate effectively, you just won't get what you need to out of it.
And there's some things you shouldn't do, is it, that would impact in performance? If you've got certain behaviors in the car, certain way of driving, or certain things you do in the car, doesn't matter what car you're driving, it's going to impact in performance, isn't it?
Absolutely. Make sure that there's oil in the engine. No matter what car you have, if there's no oil in the engine, you're probably going to blow it up, which is not a great idea. Make sure there's air in the tires. There's certain just absolute primary operating procedures and principles to driving a car, which should be similar in a home. There are absolute operating principles within a home that you should be able to follow in order to get the maximum out of your home. The car metaphor, I think, works quite well. I mean, obviously, a car is quite different in that when you're getting from point A to point B, there's a bunch of other people on the road. So if you don't do a good job, you could end up causing an accident. And there's a bunch of laws and limitations around driving, which you just don't feel that pinch in a home. The negative externalities around operating a home ineffectively could be things like health concerns. You could end up with respiratory illness. You could just be uncomfortable or unhappy. There's large amounts of mental health connected to bad living environments, especially when it comes to things like thermal comfort and acoustics levels. So it's a longer tail in terms of the price we have to pay of an inefficient and a poorly operated home than with a car. But I think the metaphor still stands.
If we're looking at New Zealand and certain behaviors and the way we treat our homes and what we do, leaving dirty dishes lying around, maybe burning candles and those other habits that actually impact air quality, would you agree maybe that our habits and our behaviors within a home are influenced by the seasons? For example, keeping the windows closed in winter.
Absolutely. I mean, it's completely controlled by the seasons in a lot of ways, because why we make decisions in terms of how we operate our homes is typically around things like thermal comfort. How warm or how cold is it? Humidity. So if there's too much humidity, is there ways that we can reduce that? Acoustic levels is another big one. So how noisy is my neighborhood, which may force me to keep the windows closed even if I want to ventilate. Security is a big thing. Either things like insects and pests. Are you living in a reserve or somewhere with gardens where when you open windows, you end up with bugs and things that come in? So you decide to keep the windows closed. And privacy is also another one. If you've got nosy neighbors that keep staring through your windows, a lot of the times you'll keep the blinds closed regardless of the season or time or day. So there's this compounding effect, and it's quite nuanced in terms of how the decisions we make as humans to operate a home in a specific way. It would be great to say that we could systemize everything and just say, well, open the windows when we need to open the windows because it is more conducive to better environmental quality. But that's not something that typically will happen, because humans are adaptable and nuanced beings. We want to live in a particular way, and sometimes we make the wrong decisions because of other impacts that those decisions might have.
If we're talking about decisions, one of the things we read in the media is that some people are sleeping on mattresses on the floor, and you can only assume that that's because some of them don't have any beds. And having worked in the property industry, I know that some people just like mattresses on the floor. And this might seem a bit out of left field, but is sleeping on the floor, even on a mattress, a bad thing for the home? And it's an interesting question because, we're also looking at people's health, aren't we?
Well, no, it's not if it's a futon. I mean, I think that's called trendy. So you pay quite a lot of money for a good futon, which is basically some wooden slats on a floor. I think the main thing to look at is not whether you're sleeping on the floor or not, but what is the environmental quality within the room you're sleeping. And you can have a really high performing home, or even just a middle of the road performing home where you're cleaning. So if you're on carpet, at least you're vacuuming a couple of times a week to get dust and dust mites and things out. If you do have those, God forbid, you've got a good temperature control. So the thermal comfort levels are in there are good. You're keeping the temperature range in a good band. You're not dropping temperatures down to then cause condensation to form. Hopefully you've got something like double glazed windows in this room as well, so that you're not having condensation on the windows. If you get some good recovery, some heat recovery or some airflow ventilation going through the room through extractor fans or some sort of heat recovery ventilation, or even just an open bedroom door, then sleeping on the floor actually will have no effect, because the environmental quality is healthy healthy enough for you to make those decisions. What happens is if you're sleeping on the floor and you have a compounding negative environment, so you don't have good thermal comfort levels, you have high levels of humidity, you've got mold potentially growing, which typically grows on the floor or on the ceiling where you have something called a thermal bridge, then that could be incredibly bad for your health because you're closer to the source of whether it's the mold growing or whether it's just the dust from the carpet on the floor. However, if it's a well-operated bedroom, absolutely no problem with sleeping on a futon or a mattress on the floor.
Be fair to say, Brendan, that you're in the business of developing technology that measures the environment of a home and makes, data, then makes deductions about the health of that home in terms of its air quality, temperature, and those sorts of things. So this possibly, as running a business that has literally analyzed hundreds of homes, would you say, and I'm sort of thinking in terms of colds and flu and other issues here, that there is a relationship between bacteria and the air and health problems that we have? Because we don't often expect the air to be contributing to our health problems, do we? It's temperature or damp.
It is air too. So air does contribute in that it's a transmitter of different types of allergens, also bacteria as well. So, there's been some interesting research happening on COVID as well, and the correlations between COVID or the spread of COVID and carbon dioxide levels. And one would think, well, how could there possibly be a relationship between CO2 and the spread of COVID? Well, CO2 builds up in non-ventilated areas. So when you have a non-ventilated room, you end up having this large buildup of CO2. And so there is correlation between the transmissibility of COVID and CO2 because of the ventilation part of it. Now, there's other parts of the air, made up through volatile organic compounds. There's particulate matter as well, which contain things like allergens, pollens, or dust mite feces, or other things like that, even smoke particles. These are all pretty bad for the respiratory system and also for your nasal passages and things. And then if you do have bacteria in the air, a non-ventilated area will make it far more likely for you to contract something than if it was a ventilated area. So the link between air and transmissible or airborne based ailments is inextricably linked. It just has to be. Things like temperature and relative humidity, those provide you with your thermal comfort level. So there's a level of uncomfortability that can lower your immune system. So if you start to sleep in rooms that are too cold, for example, below 16 degrees, that actually has a negative impact on your immune system, which could then obviously lead to illness later down the track. And on the other side, we talk about cold and damp all the time, but you can also get too hot and too humid. And there's been examples in New Zealand where, especially in the elderly, or aged care facilities, where heat has caused some severe harm, even death in some cases, when there's not sufficient ventilation or cooling within a home. So it's a balance. Not one thing specifically stands out. You obviously have acute factors when it comes to air quality that need to be looked at, like volatile organic compounds, for example. If you have formaldehyde, or if you have some sort of hydrogen chloride or some sort of nasty gas that's in the air, carbon monoxide, for example, that's being released, that's an acute problem. That's something that needs to be fixed absolutely immediately. But those are actually few and far between in terms of the reality that what we see in houses. What's more likely is things like bad temperature fluctuations, really, really cold environments or really hot environments, large amounts of relative humidity, sometimes up to the 95% relative humidity within rooms, which is close to raining within the room. You would have things like bad carbon dioxide levels, which is an indication of poor ventilation. So rooms feel really stuffy, air can't move. And again, that can help with the transmission of airborne contaminants as well. So it's even things like acoustic levels or lighting levels can lead to mental health. There's big links between mental health and acoustic levels and lighting levels as well. So it really is a holistic approach that you have to take. Good to look at each individual one and what the effects are. But to have a healthy environment, you really do need to look at the whole picture.
It's an interesting point you make about mental health, and that probably also goes back to habits. If we're leaving dishes unwashed, that impacts, oddly enough, on our mental health. But also, if we're turning lights off to save electricity, that's probably also a habit, but done for a reason. But it's also probably going to impact our health in some way, shape, or form.
Well, absolutely. If you're not living in a healthy home and you're struggling with whatever you're struggling with on a day-to-day basis, but you at the same time, you're also struggling with just a terrible living environment. When you go to bed, you're not in a happy place, you're uncomfortable, you're potentially sleeping in rooms with 2 or 3, 4 people if you're unlucky enough to be in an overcrowded environment. If you're just living in a terrible home that you're constantly having to run dehumidifiers and heat pumps, your electricity bills through the roof as a result, it's just not conducive to a happy environment, and it does have an impact on mental health. If you're living next to some sort of party house, for example, or next to a highway where you're constantly battling with noise, whether it's loud music or cars buzzing past, it can drive one mental. And we've seen this in the past, and there's been a lot of research and links between thermal comfort levels and acoustic levels and people's well-being and happiness.
Brendan, the healthy home standards require that rental properties at least have heating up to 18 degrees in the living area. And so consequently, a lot of landlords and homeowners have installed heat pumps. What are some of the health issues caused by heat pumps?
Well, heat pumps don't cause health issues specifically. What they do is they just circulate the stale air that you have. Heat pumps don't provide any level of ventilation, or they don't bring any fresh air into the room. So if you have a home that already has issues with airborne contaminants or dust or dust mites, for example, throwing a heat pump in is not going to do anything other than spread that around and create this false sense of health, because the air that comes out of it is cooler or warmer. It makes you feel thermally, your thermal comfort levels become stabilized. You get this false sense of security. But the air that's coming out there is not clean at all. You're not talking about some of these heat pumps say they have these HEPA filtration systems and things, but all the tests that have been done will show that there is no substitute for fresh air being brought in, especially if you're doing something like with a heat exchanger through heat recovery ventilation. But I wouldn't say that heat pumps are causing harm. They're just not doing any good other than conditioning the air. It's not a magic bullet, right? A lot of people think about heat pumps as this magic bullet because of how they've been advertised, especially how they're linked to the healthy home standards, but they're not. They condition the air. They don't filter them or make any healthier.
Brandon, when you started Tether, you had a certain vision and ambition around the business. What would you say the role Tether has played in helping people, make them more aware of how they're living and what they need to change?
The stuff is quite complicated. So building science or just understanding environmental quality or energy consumption or sustainability practices, which is sort of where Tether sits. What we want to do and what we are doing is making complex building science principles easy to understand by providing visualized data of what's going on within a home from a energy consumption, environmental quality, water consumption, sustainability point of view. So when you think about, to take you back to the metaphor of the car, when you think about the car and you're taking it through to the mechanic to get checked, to its warrant of fitness, and they come back with the reports of all the things that are right and that are wrong. Tether is essentially that warrant of fitness that gets produced every day, every 15 minutes of every day. If you've got some of our solutions in it, where you can look at the warrant of fitness, you can look at how is your home performing and what should you be doing to improve its environmental quality, to improve its energy consumption, therefore saving money. Got water as well, if you're interested in water consumption, which is becoming more and more topical as water starts to run out, and also overall sustainability practices. So what is your home's contribution to the planet's carbon footprint? These are all things that have been very difficult to come to grips with. The analogy of the frog in boiling water comes to mind, where we go to sleep in our homes, we rent our homes. Some of us don't have a choice on which home we rent. We just get whatever we can afford, and we're grateful to get it because of how bad the housing market is at the moment. And so we don't ask the questions. We don't think about, is this home healthy? Is it efficient? How much is it going to cost me to run? How's this impact on the planet if I care about it? What is the water consumption if I care about it? All of this information is not readily available, because we're not at that stage as New Zealanders, which is quite sad. We're just grateful to have a house. And, if you can afford one, if you can actually buy a house, we're even more grateful. The price of housing in New Zealand is astronomical. Mm-hmm. So where Tether wants to make a difference, and we are making a difference right now, is to bring that visibility back and to show landlords, to show renters, to show anybody that cares how their asset or their home actually performs and gives them ways to improve it and make it better.
As we said earlier, you've measured the data on hundreds of homes. What 2 or 3 tips can you offer to help improve the air and general health of a home, particularly in so far as it's around the habits that we have, that we live by?
So here's some interesting ones. So the first one is, everyone's heard this, but try not to dry your clothes indoors if you can, right? And I know sometimes it's impossible because of the house that you live in, but if you are going to dry your clothes inside, make sure that you at least have an open window that you ventilate regularly to get the moisture out of the air. When you dry clothes indoors and you've got all the doors and windows closed, what happens is all that moisture has to go somewhere. So it goes into the air and then it needs to condense somewhere, because otherwise you end up with formulating a cloud inside your living room. And what normally happens is that water condenses on the coldest parts of your wall, which could be the windowsills, it could be the windows, it could be the corners and the top and the bottom. And that starts to breed mold. And mold is a killer, especially in New Zealand. We've got some terrible statistics around black mold and the effects of it. And not drying your clothes indoors, or if you absolutely have to, making sure you ventilate your home effectively after you've done so will reduce incidence of mold within our homes. The next one has to do around temperature control. So the interesting thing with the behavior around temperature control is we tend to turn our heaters on when we're freezing. And we'll turn them off immediately as soon as we get hot, and then we'll just wait for it to get freezing again, and then we'll turn the heater back on to warm everything back up. That's actually an incredibly inefficient way to heat a room. The best way to actually do it, and the cheaper way to do it, is just to leave the heater on at a degree, sort of 18 to 20 degrees, whatever you feel comfortable, and just leave it on with the thermostat, so that the heater can control the heat within that room. And as it gets to that degrees, it'll turn the heater off. So you don't have to turn it off at all. But the energy required to maintain a level of temperature versus actually heating up the room from scratch again is significant. If you think about a boiling jug of water, if you have got cold water in that jug and you want to make a cup of tea or coffee and you boil that jug, it normally will take you, 4 or 5 minutes to boil it up. But let's say you leave the boiling jug for 15 to 20 minutes and then your partner says, well, can you also make me a cup of tea or coffee? How much quicker does it take to boil that jug? Probably be done in 2 minutes or 1 minute, significantly shorter, because the water is still warm. So the energy that you need to get that jug of water back up to temperature to have your cup of tea is way less than if you'd let that jug of water get right down to cold and then have to boil the whole jug again from scratch. This is how your hot water cylinder basically works. And the hot water cylinder has a lot of insulation around it. So my suggestion would be, for those rooms that are highly occupied, obviously, if you're going to be away for days or you hardly occupy a room, this doesn't make sense. But for those rooms that are highly occupied, like your living room or maybe your main bedroom, I would recommend getting your bedroom up to temperature, maybe a few hours before you're going to go to bed, and then putting it on a thermostat and leaving it on that until you wake up in the morning, and then turn the heater off. If you're going to just heat it up just before you go to bed, and then you turn it off when you go to bed, you're going to end up freezing at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning. And you probably have to then get up and turn the heater back on and have it on for hours and hours before it ends up getting back to temperature, depending on the size of the room and obviously how much insulation you have. The same thing with the living room. So I would challenge some people to try this out, whether it's with a heat pump or whether it's with a heater. Make sure it has to have a thermostat, so you can't just obviously do it by feel. So make sure the heater you have has got a thermostat. Set it to that temperature and just leave it for a period of time, and then check your power bill once you're done, just to make sure. You'll be surprised at how much more efficient it might be. If you're not paying exactly the same, you'll be paying a little bit less, but with exactly the same result.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting what you were saying, the not drying your clothes in the house. Everybody knows it. I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't?
That was news to me.
You think about where does the water go? It has
Nobody thinks about where the water goes.
And then the other tip is just a cleanliness tip. Without getting it, there are some other retrofit things we can talk about, but in terms of just a way to operate, just try to spring clean or to do a proper clean of your house at least once a month, if not once a week. Cleaning dishes and things, that's for me is an absolute. I like to clean my dishes after I'm done with them. I know that there's some people that don't, but just keeping things clean, making sure that you're wiping down windowsills, vacuuming so that you don't get massive amounts of dust buildup. It can make a huge difference, not only to your mental health, because living in a clean home feels so much better, but also to your physical health, because you don't have dust buildup and you don't have bacteria and grime and things building up on kitchen counters and bench tops and things like that. So just getting into a habit of being clean, I think, is something also worth paying attention to.
In closing, a quick reminder, Tether is the first building performance insights platform that makes it easy to have full visibility of a building's operating efficiency and environmental impact through data-driven insights. If you are a landlord, property manager, or somebody who lives under a roof, you can find out more about Tether at www.tether.co.nz. This is me, Colin, saying thanks for joining us and goodbye. Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, Colin. Appreciate it.